What's going on, everybody? Josh Engleman for Awesemo.com, and I am back with my FanDuel Thursday Night Football breakdown for tonight's game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Chicago Bears. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all of our other content goes live. Let me know in the comments section who are your favorite choices at MVP and at Flex, and follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman so you can get updates to my sim results as we get closer to lock. A couple of the basics for tonight's game. On average, the optimal lineup has 104.3 fantasy points. The median salary used, just $57,000. Another sign that you could leave some money on the table in these types of contests. The average winning lineup had 2.7 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2.3 Chicago Bears. Not a huge surprise. Bucks are favored by 3.5 points in Chicago, total just 44.5. I'm excited to dive in. Let's start with the MVPs. All right, my first two options at MVP are actually on different teams. Number one option for me is Mike Evans. He's $12K, $3,000 cheaper than Tom Brady. Now, Tom Brady is going to show up in the MVP more frequently, but his ownership is already there. 23% owned, showed up in the MVP spot, 24% in my sim. Mike Evans, on the other hand, showed up in the MVP spot 15% of the time in the sim, only pulling in 10.5% ownership. That is the best disparity between anyone else on the slate. So if I'm playing anyone in a larger field GPP, Mike Evans is the first guy that I want to slot in that MVP spot. If I'm switching that up, though, I'm going to the quarterback for the Bears. That'd be Nick Foles. Foles is $14K. He's $1,000 cheaper than Tom Brady. A little bit behind the MVP odds, though. 18% likelihood of being the top MVP. Only 15% ownership. You're not finding a lot of margins on today's slate. I think everybody is largely owned appropriately. But I'm starting with Evans. I'm moving to Foles if I need a different option. Number 3 for me would be Ronald Jones, but I like him a lot more at the flex spot. All things considered, though, Foles, Evans, Jones, Brady to a lesser extent, although that's going to be more for small field single entry type contest or a cash game if you're playing today. Tom Brady would be the guy that I would be going for there. I don't think it's all that insane to go to someone like Ryan Suckup, given his low ownership. That's the mega mind genius, you're playing in a milli type play, banking on some field goals. But if I'm ranking them in order, Evans, Foles, Jones, Brady, my top 4 MVPs on FanDuel tonight. Alrighty, as we move on to the flex spot, I gotta start at my number one guy with a bullet, and that's Ronald Jones. 10,500 on FanDuel, 14.7 fantasy point projection. He shows up in the optimal lineup 53% of the time. He's only projected for 36% ownership. That is a massive disparity. He is without question my favorite guy at Flex. I will be using him very frequently. It's not even out of the realm of possibility that I would give him the proverbial lock button. Now, I'm not saying he's a lock in his performance. Just that when I have someone that shows up so frequently in an optimal lineup with such a minimal amount of ownership, relatively speaking, those are the type of guys that end up in the 80s and 90s% for me. Second best option at the flex spot is probably going to be Tom Brady. Shows up there 54% of the time. His ownership already there, though. Projected for 49% ownership. So we're not gaining all that much. The guys where you're gaining over the field. Ronald Jones clearly at the top. David Montgomery, number 2, 12.6 fantasy point projection, shows up in the optimal 41% of the time, only 30% ownership. So I love Ronald Jones. I love David Montgomery. Again, give me Nick Foles, though. 15.9 fantasy points, 14K salary, showing up about 8% more often than the public ownership. Jones, Montgomery, Foles, those are my top 3 flex options if you're trying to spend a bunch of salary. Now, obviously, you're going to need to save a little bit, work your way down. I think Ryan Suckup at 9K, totally viable, coming in a little bit less owned than his sim results. I think Scotty Miller at 8K is probably the best of anybody you can pay down for. We know that the Bucs are without Chris Godwin. Scotty Miller should see a ton of action. You'd like for him to be able to get the full PPR, so we'll talk about him in the DraftKings video. But even in half PPR, 8K for Scotty Miller and the volume he'll see, he is the best option for paying down. After that, I'm not all that enamored with anyone. I'm more likely to find some fades in this area than I am some strong plays. Now, there are a few fades at MVP, but they're all more generic. None of these guys are really getting a ton of ownership. I don't have any interest in Jimmy Graham or Cairo Santos. I don't really want any Anthony Miller in the MVP spot. I don't want Gronk. David Montgomery, probably a little overowned. He's projected for 8.3% ownership in the MVP spot. I think it's more like 6.5. So David Montgomery, a guy that I'm less likely to get to at MVP. As we move over to the flex side, it's a little bit more extreme. The number one guy showing up in my sim as a fade is Keyshawn Vaughn. Only have him projected for 6 fantasy points. He's 7K, already picking up almost 18% ownership. Only showed up in the optimal 6% of the time. Keyshawn Vaughn, my biggest fade. I am not comfortable with that one after watching the Bucs last week, but following the data, gonna try to ignore Keyshawn Vaughn as much as possible. Gonna try to avoid Rob Gronkowski as much as possible. Just does not look great out there. I'm not really worried about it. If Gronk beats me, he beats me. Similar story on the opposite side. I don't really have a ton of interest in Jimmy Graham. I think Gronk, Graham, and Vaughn all getting pretty highly overowned. As is Anthony Miller, 9,500. That's the highest salary guy that I'm looking to shy away from. 18.5% ownership, shows up in the optimal flex spot just 13% of the time. So to sum that up, Anthony Miller, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, Keyshawn Vaughn, those are the 4 guys that I'm looking to be pretty light on or not have at all as we get closer to lock. Alrighty, folks, that will do it. That is my FanDuel single game breakdown for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Chicago Bears. One last call. Please hit that like button. You know how much it means to me. It means a ton. I love seeing those numbers climb. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. We crank out content constantly. 24/7, we are putting up videos. It's really not that frequent, but you guys know what I mean. And finally, follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman so you get updates to these sims as we get closer to lock. I can't wait to see what you guys have in the comment section. I can't wait to see who you like the most at the MVP and the flex spot. Check out my DraftKings video wherever that link is showing up. Similar style, different format, obviously, but you get it for FanDuel and you get it for DK. Good luck tonight, guys. Enjoy this Thursday. I'll be back again for Sunday Night Football.